The rain pounded mercilessly on Jack Thompson's shoulders as he pedaled his weathered bicycle through Boston's crowded streets. His threadbare jacket offered little protection against the November chill, but the pounding of his heart warmed his chest with anxious heat. This interview at Tech Advance was everything, his one shot at escaping the suffocating grip of poverty that had tightened since his return from Afghanistan. His resume, protected in a plastic folder inside his backpack, represented months of applications, rejections, and desperate hope. That's when he saw her, a German shepherd huddled against an abandoned building, her fur matted with mud and something darker, blood. Her swollen belly heaved with labored breaths, eyes reflecting a pain Jack recognized all too well. Time seemed to freeze as their gazes locked. In that moment, Jack was transported back to the dust-filled air of Kandahar, to Shadow, his service dog who had saved his unit before taking a bullet meant for him. The interview was in 20 minutes, his future, his mother's medication, his sister's college tuition, all hanging in the balance. Jack gripped his handlebars until his knuckles turned white, watching as the dog whimpered and tried to stand. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty promises of a corporate future as he turned his bicycle toward the injured animal. Some choices aren't really choices at all. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Jack Thompson hadn't always been a man who chased entry-level interviews on a rusted bicycle. 3 years ago, he'd worn the uniform of a decorated Army sergeant, leading a specialized K-9 unit through the treacherous terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province. His service dog, Shadow, a loyal German shepherd with intelligence that sometimes seemed human, had saved his squad multiple times by detecting IEDs and ambushes. But on their final mission, Shadow had lunged in front of Jack during an unexpected firefight, taking a bullet meant for his handler. Jack made it home with a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. Shadow came home in a flag-draped box that Jack couldn't bring himself to open. The nightmares started soon after. Jack would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the sound of gunfire and Shadow's final yelp still echoing in his ears. The VA diagnosed him with severe PTSD, prescribed medications he couldn't afford, and recommended therapy sessions that conflicted with whatever odd jobs he could find. His savings evaporated within months as he helped support his widowed mother's increasing medical bills and his younger sister Abby's community college tuition. The small apartment they shared in South Boston had become a pressure cooker of financial anxiety, with past due notices piling up on their kitchen table like fallen autumn leaves. At 32, Jack was overqualified for minimum wage positions, yet underqualified for stability. His computer science degree from before his enlistment was now outdated, and the 6-month coding boot camp he'd completed using his GI Bill benefits had resulted in dozens of interviews but 0 offers. Each potential employer seemed impressed by his technical skills until the mandatory disclosure of his condition. Then came the too familiar "we'll call you" that never materialized into anything more than crushing silence. Some nights, Jack would sit on their cramped balcony, staring at the distant Boston skyline, wondering if the city had room for broken soldiers who still jumped at car backfires and slept with the lights on. Despite everything, Jack maintained the disciplined determination of his military days. He rose before dawn, helped his mother with her morning routine, made breakfast for Abby, and meticulously prepared for each interview. His compassion had survived the war intact. He still volunteered at the local Veterans Center when time allowed and never passed a homeless person without offering whatever small kindness he could afford. This interview at Tech Advance represented not just a job but redemption, proof that his sacrifices hadn't left him permanently sidelined from the life he'd once expected to live. Jack approached the trembling German shepherd cautiously, his military training kicking in automatically. "Easy, girl, I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured, crouching low and extending his hand, palm down. The dog's eyes, amber and intelligent, tracked his movements with a wary vigilance that spoke of past betrayals. As Jack inched closer, he noticed the constellation of old scars partially hidden beneath her dirty fur. cigarette burns peppering her flank, a jagged line where someone had struck her with something sharp, and a notch missing from her left ear. Her distended belly confirmed what Jack had suspected. She was heavily pregnant and, judging by her labored breathing, possibly in the early stages of labor. "Who did this to you?" Jack whispered, anger rising in his throat as he gently ran his fingers over the dog's head. She flinched at first, but then leaned into his touch with a desperation that broke his heart. A worn leather collar hung loosely around her neck, the tag damaged to the point of illegibility except for a partial name, Bell. Carefully, Jack checked for any immediate injuries that might explain the blood he'd seen. A laceration on her right hind leg was bleeding steadily. Not life-threatening, but definitely requiring attention, especially with puppies on the way. Jack glanced at his watch, 10:40 a.m. His interview was at 11, across town. Even if he left right now, he'd barely make it on time. The dog whimpered and shifted uncomfortably, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. With a resigned sigh, Jack pulled off his only good tie, the one he'd ironed carefully that morning, and wrapped it gently around the dog's bleeding leg. "Don't worry, girl," he said. "We're going to get you some help." The transportation dilemma hit him immediately. His bicycle wouldn't work, and he couldn't afford a taxi. Public buses wouldn't allow an unleashed bleeding dog. Jack pulled out his phone with shaking hands, canceling his rideshare app when he saw the $30 estimate to the nearest vet clinic. The rain continued to pour, soaking through his jacket as he frantically scrolled through his contacts. Finally, he called Ellis, a fellow veteran who drove a delivery truck. "Ellis, I need a huge favor," Jack explained breathlessly. "I found an injured pregnant dog, and I need to get her to a vet now." Ellis's gruff voice betrayed no hesitation. "Text me your location. I'll be there in 10. While waiting, Jack fashioned a makeshift leash from his belt and tried calling Tech Advance to reschedule. The receptionist's voice was professionally detached. "I am sorry, Mr. Thompson, but Mr. Brennan's schedule is fully booked for the next 3 weeks. I can put you back in the applicant pool, but I can't guarantee another interview." Jack closed his eyes, swallowing hard. "I understand. Please let Mr. Brennan know something urgent came up. A life-or-death situation." Ellis arrived in his beat-up Ford pickup, jumping out to help Jack lift the increasingly distressed dog into the cab. "Animal emergency at Brighton?" Ellis asked, already knowing the answer as he slammed the truck into gear. "Yeah, and step on it. I think she's starting labor," Jack replied, noting the dog's intensifying contractions. The German Shepherd laid her head in Jack's lap, her body trembling with each acceleration. Jack stroked her head, whispering reassurances as Ellis weaved through traffic, with the determination of someone who'd driven through war zones. They reached the veterinary clinic in 15 minutes, just as the dog's contractions increased dramatically. Jack carried her through the doors, shouting for help. Dr. Sarah Collins, a young veterinarian with quick eyes and quicker hands, rushed forward. "She's in active labor and she has a leg injury," Jack explained as technicians brought a gurney. "Are you the owner?" Dr. Collins asked, already examining the makeshift bandage. "No, I found her abandoned. Can you help her?" Dr. Collins nodded briskly. "We'll need to check for a microchip and address that leg before delivery. The puppies might be in distress. You should wait outside." A sharp yelp cut through the clinic as the dog began straining in earnest. One of the technicians called out, "We've got crowning. First puppy's coming now, but it's breech." Dr. Collins cursed under her breath. "We need hands." "You?" She pointed at Jack. "Did you say you were military?" "Any medical training?" Jack nodded. "Combat medic adjacent. I assisted our unit's medic frequently." "Wash up and get in here," she commanded, leading the dog into an exam room. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Jack's interview time came and went as he helped deliver 6 puppies, the first requiring careful manipulation to prevent asphyxiation. His hands worked with mechanical precision, muscle memory from battlefield scenarios redirected to create life rather than preserve it. When the 6th and final puppy, a tiny runt with a white star on her chest, finally arrived, Jack nearly collapsed from the emotional exhaustion. Here." Collins placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You saved that last puppy's life. She would have suffocated without your help." Jack looked down at his blood-stained shirt, suddenly remembering the pristine resume in his backpack, the carefully rehearsed answers to interview questions, and the job that represented his family's financial salvation. His watch read 1:15 p.m. The interview opportunity was long gone, along with the tie that now lay discarded in a medical waste bin. Looking at the mother dog, now cleaning her puppies with exhausted dedication, Jack couldn't find it in himself to regret his choice. "What will happen to them now?" he asked quietly. Dr. Collins sighed. "We'll check for a microchip, try to locate an owner. If none comes forward, they'll go to the shelter, once they're stable." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the German shepherd, who now watched him with what he could only describe as gratitude. "Her name is Bella," he said suddenly, not knowing where the certainty came from. "It suits her." Jack sat in the veterinary clinic's waiting room, the adrenaline of the emergency delivery gradually fading into a hollow awareness of what he'd sacrificed. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his sister Abby, who'd been waiting to hear about the interview. He couldn't bring himself to return them yet. The clock on the wall seemed to mock him with each tick, counting down the moments until he'd have to face his family and admit he'd thrown away their best chance at financial stability for a stray dog. Yet whenever doubt crept in, he remembered the feel of that tiny runt puppy taking its first breath in his hands, and something in his chest would tighten. Some prices were worth paying, even if the cost was steep. Dr. Collins emerged from the treatment area, her scrub spotted with the day's efforts. "Belle and her puppies are stable," she said, dropping into the chair beside him. "We found a microchip, but it's registered to a shelter in Maryland. She was adopted 3 years ago, but the new owner never updated the information." She studied Jack's face. "You military?" "Afghanistan, 3 tours," Jack replied, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "K-9 unit." She nodded, understanding filling the silence between them. "That explains a lot. Look, I can tell you're worried about something more than just these dogs. Want to talk about it?" Jack let out a hollow laugh. "I had a job interview today. Tech company, good salary, benefits. Something that could have pulled my family out of the hole we're in." He gestured vaguely at his stained clothes. "Obviously, I missed it." If Collins tilted her head. "Some people would have kept driving. That says something about you, you know." She hesitated, then added, "There's a cafe down the street, Riverside Coffee. The owner, Frank, is a Vietnam vet. He mentioned yesterday he's hiring. It's not tech work, but—" She trailed off, letting the suggestion hang in the air. Jack checked his phone again. 2:30 p.m. Another day wasted in the endless job search, another failure to report home. What difference would one more rejection make? "I guess I could stop by," he said, more to himself than to her. "Thanks for taking care of Bella." "Thank you for bringing her in," Dr. Collins replied, standing. "I'll call you if there are any changes. And Jack, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice today." 30 minutes later, Jack stood outside Riverside Coffee, a modest storefront with warm lighting and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans spilling onto the sidewalk. His interview clothes were a disaster, but he squared his shoulders and entered anyway. Inside, the cafe was half-sealed with afternoon customers, the atmosphere comfortable and unpretentious. Behind the counter stood a man in his 70s with a military straight posture and white hair cut in a style that hadn't changed since the 1970s. "Help you?" the man asked, eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Jack's disheveled appearance. "I heard you might be hiring," Jack said, fighting the urge to apologize for his appearance. "Dr. Collins from the vet clinic mentioned it." Recognition flickered across the older man's face. "Sarah sent you? You must be something special then. She doesn't recommend just anybody." He extended a weathered hand. "Frank Miller. This is my place. Jack Thompson, and I wouldn't say I'm special." He briefly explained the situation with Bella, carefully omitting any mention of his missed interview or financial struggles. Frank listened without interruption, then gestured toward a table in the corner. "Sit down, son. Let's talk." As they settled, Frank leveled a penetrating gaze at Jack. "Military?" Yes, sir. Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Frank nodded as if this confirmed something. I was in Vietnam. Cu Chi, 68 to 70. This simple statement carried the weight of shared understanding between them. Now, why is a military man with what I'm guessing is some kind of college degree looking to work in my coffee shop? Jack hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm having trouble finding work in my field. PTSD episodes in my medical record. Companies say all the right things about hiring veterans, but when it comes down to it, he shrugged. You can guess the rest. Frank's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. What happened today? And don't give me that sanitized version you just did. Jack took a deep breath and told him everything. The Tech Advance interview, finding Bella, the choice he'd made, and what it had cost him. As the words poured out, he realized he'd been carrying the weight of not just today's decision, but months of rejection and struggling to find his place in a world that seemed to have no use for damaged soldiers. When he finished, Frank was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "You're almost 30 minutes late for your interview with me, and you look like hell." His stern expression suddenly broke into a crooked smile. "But I like a man who knows what matters. Job's yours if you want it. Pay's not great to start, but I offer health insurance to full-timers, and the schedule's flexible." Stunned, Jack struggled to find words. "Just like that? You don't want to check my references, or—" "Your reference is what you did today," Frank interrupted. "I've got good instincts about people, kept me alive in the jungle and in business for 40 years. Can you start tomorrow?" For the first time that day, Jack felt something close to hope. It wasn't the tech job he'd dreamed of, but it was something solid, a beginning. "Yes, sir, I can start tomorrow." The next morning, Jack woke before dawn as usual, but with a purpose that had been missing for months. He helped his mother with her medications, made breakfast for Abby, and was preparing to leave for his first day at Riverside Coffee when there was a firm knock at the door. Opening it, Jack found himself face to face with a tall, imposing man in his 50s, wearing an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent. "Jack Thompson?" the stranger asked, his voice carrying the cultivated confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Yes," Jack replied cautiously. The man extended his hand. "Michael Williams, I understand you helped my dog yesterday." His piercing blue eyes assessed Jack with uncomfortable intensity. "I'd like to speak with you about that, and about a job opportunity that might interest you." Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing to process this unexpected development. Behind Michael, a sleek black luxury car idled at the curb, its presence as out of place in Jack's neighborhood as the man himself. Somehow, Jack knew his life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Jack studied Michael Williams skeptically as they sat in a corner booth at Williams' restaurant, The Heritage, an upscale establishment in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The restaurant wouldn't open for another 3 hours, but staff bustled about, polishing silverware and preparing for the lunch service. Jack felt painfully out of place in his worn jeans and faded button-up, the best he could manage after yesterday's ordeal. Williams had barely touched his coffee, instead watching Jack with the calculated patience of a man accustomed to being in control. "So you're telling me Bella is your dog?" Jack asked, still struggling to reconcile this polished businessman with the neglected animal he'd rescued. Williams nodded. "She went missing 3 days ago during her evening walk with her housekeeper. We've been searching everywhere." He slid a business card across the table. "I own 4 restaurants in Boston, including this one. My wife called the emergency vet this morning about a German Shepherd, and they mentioned you." Something in his expression shifted slightly. "I understand you have military experience and computer skills, yet you're currently unemployed?" Jack bristled at the implied judgment. "The job market isn't exactly welcoming to veterans with PTSD, Mr. Williams." To Jack's surprise, Williams didn't flinch at his directness. "I need someone with both technical aptitude and real-world crisis management skills." someone who can think on their feet when things go sideways, as they inevitably do in the restaurant business. He leaned forward. I'm offering you a position as assistant manager at the Heritage, with training to become full manager within 6 months if things work out. Starting salary is $65,000, plus benefits. Jack nearly choked on his coffee. The amount was nearly triple what Frank had offered at the cafe, enough to catch up on his mother's medical bills and help with Abby's tuition. Why me? You don't know anything about me. William's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I know you sacrificed a job opportunity to save my dog and her puppies. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The rest can be taught. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Jack hesitated, thinking of Frank's offer and the simple honesty of the veteran cafe owner. I actually accepted another job yesterday, at Riverside Coffee. Williams nodded. Frank's a good man. I've already spoken with him. He understands this is an opportunity you shouldn't pass up. Williams checked his watch, the casual gesture somehow emphasizing the gulf between their worlds. I need your answer now, Mr. Thompson. I have meetings all afternoon. Jack took a deep breath and shook Williams' hand. When do I start? The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of training and acclimation. The Heritage was a high-end establishment specializing in reimagined classic American cuisine, with a clientele of Boston's elite and a staff who initially eyed Jack with thinly veiled skepticism. His first day had been a disaster of epic proportions. He'd spilled a tray of drinks on a city councilman, mixed up several reservations, and nearly had a panic attack when a car backfired outside the restaurant during his break. Chef Antoine, a French culinary artist with a volcanic temper, had been particularly merciless. This is not a charity case for broken soldiers, he'd shouted after Jack confused the seating chart for the 3rd time. Michael may have a soft spot for you, but my kitchen requires precision. Only Alina, the head server and a fellow veteran who'd served in Iraq, had shown him any kindness. Ignore Antoine, she'd advised during Jack's lunch break as he sat with his head in his hands. He treats everyone like that for the first month. It's his way of testing if you'll break. She'd studied him with shrewd eyes. You won't break, will you, Thompson? Jack had straightened his shoulders, muscle memory from basic training kicking in. No, I won't. By the end of the 3rd week, Jack had developed systems to manage his anxiety in the high-pressure environment. He arrived an hour before his shift to walk through the restaurant in solitude, mentally preparing for the day ahead. He kept a small photo of Shadow, his service dog, in his wallet, touching it briefly when he felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded an episode. And most importantly, he threw himself into learning every aspect of the restaurant business with the same disciplined focus he had once applied to military operations. Williams observed Jack's progress with detached interest, occasionally offering terse approval or pointed criticism, but otherwise remaining an enigmatic presence. He rarely mentioned Bella or the puppies, and when Jack inquired about them, Williams would merely say they were being well cared for before changing the subject. Something about the man's carefully maintained distance struck Jack as odd, but the paycheck that allowed him to finally pay his mother's overdue medical bills silenced any doubts. By the end of his 2nd month, Jack had earned a grudging respect from the staff. Chef Antoine still bellowed criticisms, but now they were directed equally at everyone. The waitstaff came to Jack with scheduling conflicts and personal problems, recognizing his fair-minded approach to management. Even Elena, initially reserved despite her friendliness, began to share more about her own struggles with civilian reintegration during their occasional after-shift drinks. You know, you're not what I expected, she admitted one evening as they sat at the bar after closing. When Michael brought you in, we all thought you were just another of his projects. Jack paused with his glass halfway to his lips. His projects? Elena shrugged. Michael has a thing for rehabilitation cases. Before you, there was a former addict he made sous chef at his Cambridge restaurant. Before that, an ex-con who now manages his financial accounts. She studied Jack's expression. You didn't know? That's his whole thing. finding broken people and fixing them up like old cars. Jack felt a chill despite the warmth of the bar. "Did he tell you how he found me?" "Something about you helping with a family emergency," Elena replied, her brow furrowing at Jack's sudden tension. "Why? What really happened?" Before Jack could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Williams. "Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Performance review." Jack stared at the message, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. Why would Williams schedule a review now when he'd been consistently improving? "I should get home," Jack said, suddenly eager to escape the conversation and the doubts it had raised. "Early meeting tomorrow." That night, lying in bed, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Williams' interest in him than professional development. The man's detachment, his reluctance to discuss Bella, and now Elena's revelation about his projects, painted a picture that didn't align with the grateful dog owner who'd offered Jack a life-changing opportunity. For the first time since starting at the Heritage, Jack found himself wondering what he'd really gotten himself into. The next morning, Jack arrived at Williams' office precisely at 9 a.m., his stomach tight with anticipation. The office was minimalist and imposing, all steel, glass, and leather that spoke of wealth without ostentation. Williams sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents with such focus that he didn't acknowledge Jack's entrance for several long moments. "Sit down, Thompson," he finally said, gesturing to the chair opposite him without looking up. When he did raise his gaze, Jack was struck by the calculating assessment in those ice-blue eyes. "You've been with us for 2 months now. Overall, your performance has exceeded expectations." "Thank you, sir," Jack replied, relaxing slightly. "However," Williams continued, "there are concerns about your stability. Chef Antoine reports that you had an episode last week when a tray of glasses shattered near the kitchen." Jack stiffened. He'd managed to step outside for 5 minutes, regulate his breathing, and return without anyone noticing. Or so he'd thought. It was momentary. "It didn't affect my work," Williams nodded this time. "But the Heritage can't afford unpredictability in its management." He leaned back, studying Jack. "I'm expanding the restaurant's technology systems. Preservation management, inventory tracking, customer data analysis. Given your background in IT, I think you'd be better suited to managing that aspect of our operations rather than front-of-house service." The offer was presented as a promotion, but Jack recognized the subtle demotion, a move to take him out of customer-facing roles and tuck him away behind computers. "With all due respect, sir, I've worked hard to adapt to the front-of-house position. My PTSD is manageable." "Is it?" Williams asked, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your military records suggest otherwise." Jack stared at the folder, ice flooding his veins. "How did you get my military records?" Williams waved the question away. "I have connections, Jack. The point is, I'm offering you a position that better suits your capabilities while minimizing your vulnerabilities." Something in Williams's tone, the faintest hint of smug satisfaction, ignited a slow burn of anger in Jack's chest. "You didn't just happen to find me because of Bella, did you? You've been watching me, assessing me. Why?" For the briefest moment, surprise flickered across Williams' composed features. Then his expression smoothed again, unreadable as ever. "You're being paranoid, Thompson. I'm trying to help you. The way you help all your rehabilitation projects," Jack pressed, Elena's words from the previous night echoing in his mind. "What is this really about, Mr. Williams? Because it's not about managing a restaurant, and I'm starting to think it's not about Bella either." Williams stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of the movement. "You're forgetting your place, Thompson. I gave you an opportunity when no one else would. I can just as easily take it away." He checked his watch. That same dismissive gesture Jack had noticed in their first meeting. "Think about the technology position over the weekend. I expect your answer Monday morning." Jack left the office with his thoughts in turmoil. Something wasn't right about Michael Williams, but he couldn't piece together what it was. Outside the restaurant, he paused, drawing in deep breaths of the crisp autumn air. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and called the veterinary clinic where he'd taken Bella. "Dr. Collins, it's Jack Thompson. I was wondering if I could ask you something about Bella, the German shepherd I brought in a couple months ago." Sarah's voice warmed noticeably. "Jack, I was hoping you'd call. How are you?" "I'm, managing," Jack hedged. "Listen, did Bella's owner ever come to pick her up? A man named Michael Williams?" There was a pause on the line. "Jack, no one ever claimed Bella. She and the puppies are still here, though we've had to transfer the puppies to foster care. We've been trying to reach you. We thought you might want to adopt her, given the bond you formed." Jack leaned against the building, his mind racing. "But Williams told me Bella was his dog, that she'd gone missing during a walk with his housekeeper." "I don't know who this Williams is," Sarah replied, concern evident in her voice, "but he never came here. We scanned Bella's microchip. She was registered to a shelter in Maryland, adopted 3 years ago by someone named Sarah Williams, not Michael. The contact information was outdated." "Sarah Williams," Jack repeated, a cold realization dawning. "Could that be his wife?" "Possibly," Sarah conceded. "But Jack, there's something else. When we did Bella's full examination, we found evidence of long-term neglect and abuse. Whoever owned her didn't treat her well. That's not something that happens over a few days of being lost." Jack thanked her and hung up, his suspicions now a certainty. Williams had lied about Bella, which meant he'd likely lied about other things as well. But why? What possible reason could the successful restaurateur have for fabricating a connection to a stray dog in order to offer Jack a job? That evening, Jack worked his shift with mechanical precision, his mind occupied with the puzzle of Michael Williams. He observed the restaurant with new eyes, noting details he'd previously overlooked. The private dining room that was always locked, the meetings Williams held with serious-looking men who never arrived through the main entrance, the fact that despite the restaurant's apparent success, Jack had never seen its financial records. Elena caught him staring at the locked private dining room during a lull in service. "Curiosity killed the cat, you know," she murmured, following his gaze. "What goes on in there?" Jack asked quietly. Elena shrugged, but her casual demeanor seemed forced. "VIP clients, special events, above our pay grade." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Listen, Jack, you're a good guy, but if you're smart, you'll keep your head down and do your job. Michael doesn't like people asking questions. Is that a warning?" Elena met his eyes, and for the first time, Jack saw genuine concern there. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to people who get too curious about Michael's business. It's never ended well." Before Jack could press further, they were interrupted by the maitre d' announcing the arrival of special guests. Jack turned to see Michael Williams entering the restaurant, his arm linked with a striking woman whose elegant appearance matched his own. Behind them trailed an older man with a military bearing similar to Frank's, though his expensive suit marked him as belonging to Williams' world rather than Jack's. "That's Sarah Williams, Michael's wife," Elena whispered. "And the other man is James Brennan, CEO of Tech Advance. They're regulars." Jack froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. James Brennan, the executive whose interview he'd missed the day he found Bella. The coincidence was too great to be random. As if sensing his scrutiny, Williams looked up and caught Jack's gaze across the restaurant. A small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth as he nodded in acknowledgement. In that moment, Jack knew with absolute certainty that nothing about his position at the Heritage was what it seemed. There was a larger game being played, and he had somehow become a pawn in it. The question was no longer whether Williams had ulterior motives, but what those motives were, and how dangerous it might be to discover them. The following Sunday afternoon found Jack anxiously pacing outside the upscale brownstone in Beacon Hill where the Williams family lived. After seeing James Brennan at the restaurant, Jack had spent his days off conducting careful research into Michael Williams and his business interests. What he'd discovered only deepened his suspicions. The restaurateur had expanded rapidly over the past 5 years, acquiring properties in strategically valuable locations throughout Boston, many of them following mysterious fires or financial collapses of their previous owners. Jack had also uncovered connections between Williams and several city officials currently under federal investigation for corruption. None of it was conclusive, but the pattern was troubling enough that Jack couldn't simply return to work on Monday without confronting the truth. He'd called Dr. Collins that morning, confirming that Bella was still at the clinic and arranging to visit her later. But first he needed answers from Sarah Williams. Elena had mentioned that Michael typically spent Sundays at his golf club, while Sarah usually remained at home, information Jack had filed away without realizing he'd need it. Now, steeling himself, he approached the ornate front door and rang the bell. A young woman in a housekeeper's uniform answered, her expression skeptical as she took in Jack's appearance. "Yes? I need to speak with Mrs. Williams. It's about Bella." The name produced an immediate reaction. The housekeeper's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously over her shoulder before turning back to Jack. "Wait here, please." She closed the door, leaving Jack on the doorstep for several tense minutes, before it reopened to reveal Sarah Williams. In person, without her husband's dominating presence beside her, Sarah appeared both younger and more fragile than she had at the restaurant. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without makeup, the faint bruising around her left eye was visible despite attempts to conceal it. "You're Jack," she said quietly, her voice carrying a lilting Southern accent absent from her husband's speech. "Michael's new manager." Her gaze was wary but direct. "Camilla says you mentioned Bella?" Jack nodded. "Mrs. Williams, I know this is forward of me, but I'm the one who found Bella 2 months ago, injured and pregnant, abandoned in South Boston. Your husband claimed she was his dog that had gone missing, but the vet clinic says no one ever came to claim her." He paused, watching her expression carefully. The microchip was registered to a Sarah Williams from Maryland. Color drained from Sarah's face. She glanced behind her again, then stepped onto the porch, pulling the door nearly closed. "Michael told me Bella ran away while I was visiting my sister in Richmond," she whispered. "He said she was hit by a car and died," her voice cracked. "Are you saying she's alive and had puppies?" The genuine shock and hope in her eyes confirmed Jack's suspicions. "She's at Boston Animal Emergency Clinic in Brighton. She had 6 healthy puppies, all in foster care now." He hesitated, then added gently, "Mrs. Williams, Bella, showed signs of long-term abuse. Cigarette burns, cuts, malnutrition." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hand moving unconsciously to her partially concealed bruise. "Michael hated her," she whispered. "I got her from a shelter before we were married. She was a service dog who'd been retired after her handler died. After we moved to Boston, Michael said she was dirty, unpredictable. She broke off, swallowing hard. "He'd punish her when he was angry." Jack felt a cold fury building inside him, but kept his voice steady. "Mrs. Williams, Sarah, I think you might be in danger. The things I've discovered about your husband—" "You don't understand," she interrupted, fear flashing across her features. "Michael is connected, powerful. If he found out I was talking to you—" She stopped as a sleek black car turned onto the street. "You need to go, now. That's his car." Jack retreated quickly, ducking around the corner as the car pulled up in front of the brownstone. From his vantage point, he watched Michael Williams emerge, his golf attire immaculate, his movements precise and controlled as always. Sarah had retreated inside, but Jack could see Williams pausing on the doorstep, looking around as if sensing something amiss. The calculating assessment in his posture sent a chill down Jack's spine. 20 minutes later, Jack sat in the sterile examination room at the veterinary clinic, his heart pounding as the door opened and Dr. Collins led in a transformed Bella. The emaciated, terrified dog he'd rescued had become a healthy, alert German shepherd, her coat gleaming, her amber eyes bright with intelligence. She froze upon seeing Jack, her head tilting as if trying to place him in her memory. Then, with a soft whine, she bounded forward, nearly knocking him over as she pressed against him, her entire body wiggling with joy. "She remembers you," Sarah said, smiling at the reunion. "That's rare after so much time, especially with everything she's been through." Jack buried his face in Bella's fur, momentarily overwhelmed by the connection to this animal who had changed the course of his life. "Hey, girl," he whispered. "I missed you, too." Sarah leaned against the examination table, her expression softening. "I've been hoping you'd come back for her. She needs someone who understands trauma." She paused, studying him. "Like you do." Jack looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I have worked with enough service dogs to recognize the signs," she replied gently. "The hypervigilance, the way you positioned yourself in the waiting room with clear sight lines to all exits, how you're keeping your breathing controlled even now. You served, didn't you?" Jack nodded, feeling strangely exposed, yet understood. "Afghanistan. 3 tours. Bella was trained to assist veterans with PTSD before her original handler died," Sarah said. "She still has those instincts. She's been helping our clinic director through panic attacks." She smiled as Bella pressed closer to Jack. "I think she's chosen her person again." Jack stroked Bella's head, a lump forming in his throat. "I can't afford the adoption fees right now," he admitted, "and my apartment building doesn't allow large dogs." Sarah waved away his concerns. "Consider the fees waived. As for housing—" She was interrupted by her phone ringing. "Excuse me, I need to take this." Jack continued reuniting with Bella while Sarah stepped into the hallway. When she returned minutes later, her expression was troubled. "That was a friend from the shelter where I volunteered in Maryland. She's trying to track down some information for me about Bella's original owner." She hesitated. "Jack, I think there might be more to Bella's story than we know. Can you come back tomorrow? I might have more information then." Jack agreed, reluctance to part with Bella again evident in his every movement. As he stood to leave, Sarah impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saving her. Not many people would have sacrificed what you did for a stray dog." The simple sincerity in her words stayed with Jack through his trip home and his restless evening preparations for his Monday meeting with Williams. By morning, he'd made his decision. He would confront Williams about the lies regarding Bella, resign his position, and find work elsewhere, even if it meant starting over again. Some compromises weren't worth making, especially not with a man who would abuse an animal and then lie about it. Jack arrived at the Heritage early Monday morning, determined to have the conversation before the restaurant began its lunch preparations. The dining room was empty save for Elena, who was reviewing reservation lists at the host's stand. She looked up as Jack entered, relief washing over her face. "Thank God you're here. Michael's been on a rampage all morning. Something about his wife visiting a vet clinic yesterday." Her eyes narrowed. "Jack, what have you gotten yourself into?" Before Jack could respond, William's voice cut across the dining room. "Thompson, my office, now." The restaurateur stood in his office doorway, his usual polish marred by obvious tension. Jack nodded to Elena and followed Williams, closing the door behind him. Williams didn't sit, instead pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. "You went to my home yesterday. You spoke to my wife. You've been asking questions about my business." Each statement landed like an accusation. "Explain yourself, Thompson." Jack remained standing, his military training instinctively kicking in as he faced the agitated man. "I discovered you lied about Bella. She was never your dog. She belongs to your wife. And according to Sarah, you told her Bella was dead." Jack held Williams' gaze steadily. "I also found evidence that your restaurant acquisitions follow suspicious patterns, and your connections to city officials under investigation raise questions about your business practices." Williams went very still, his eyes cold. "You've been busy. What exactly do you want, Thompson? Money to keep quiet? A better position?" "I want the truth," Jack replied simply. "And then I want my resignation accepted." A harsh laugh escaped Williams. "The truth? Fine. Here's your truth. I saw your application to Tech Advance, your background, your skills, your military service. I needed someone with your specific experience, but I couldn't approach you directly. When I learned you'd missed your interview to help a stray dog, I saw my opportunity." His lip curled slightly. The dog was convenient. Sarah had been whining about her precious Bella disappearing for weeks. I simply connected the dots. "You abandoned your wife's dog deliberately," Jack stated flatly. "You let her believe Bella was dead." Williams shrugged. "The mutt was a nuisance. Jumped whenever I raised my voice, growled when I came near Sarah. Better off gone." He studied Jack's barely contained anger with detached interest. "As for my business practices, let's just say Boston's restaurant scene requires certain accommodations. Nothing that concerns you." "It does concern me if you're involving me in something illegal," Jack countered. Williams smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Who would believe you, Thompson? A traumatized veteran with documented paranoia and delusions? The word of a man like you against mine?" He gestured dismissively. "Your resignation is accepted. Clear out your desk and be gone by noon." Jack turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Mr. Williams. Does the name Daniel Brennan mean anything to you?" The question hit its mark. Williams' carefully controlled expression faltered momentarily. "Where did you hear that name?" "Just curious," Jack replied, noting the reaction. "Good day, Mr. Williams." Jack had nearly finished clearing his few personal items when Elena found him. "You're really leaving?" she asked, leaning against the door frame of the small office he had been using. "No choice," Jack replied, not looking up. "Williams and I have irreconcilable differences." Elena closed the door behind her and lowered her voice. "This is about more than a dog, isn't it? You've figured it out?" Jack finally met her gaze. "Figured what out? Why, Williams really hired you." She glanced nervously at the door. "It's because of your connection to the Brennan brothers, James and Daniel. You were applying to work for James at Tech Advance when you rescued the dog, but you also served with Daniel Brennan in Afghanistan. He was in your unit." Jack stared at her, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been investigating Williams for 8 months, Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not just a server, Jack. I work for the Boston Globe. Investigative journalism. I'm embedded here gathering evidence of Williams' connections to organized crime and political corruption." Jack's mind raced, pieces suddenly falling into place. Daniel Brennan was our unit's communications specialist. He uncovered evidence that defense contractors were selling information to insurgents. The memory sent a familiar chill through him. "He was killed in the same ambush that took Shadow, my service dog," Elena nodded grimly. "And his brother James now runs Tech Advance, one of the contractors Daniel was investigating. Williams does business with James Brennan. They're partners in more than just restaurants." She took a deep breath. "Williams hired you because he's been trying to determine how much you know about what Daniel discovered. He's been watching you, testing you." The revelation left Jack reeling. "I don't know anything. Daniel kept his investigation compartmentalized. He only told me he had concerns, not details." "Williams doesn't know that," Elena pointed out, "and now that you've confronted him, you're a loose end." She gripped his arm urgently. "Jack, you need to be careful. These people don't leave loose ends untied." Jack was processing this new information when a commotion erupted in the main dining room. Raised voices, something crashing to the floor. Elena's expression shifted to alarm as they hurried to investigate. In the center of the restaurant stood Sarah Williams, her face flushed with emotion, Bella straining at a leash beside her. Across from them, Michael Williams stood rigidly, his expression thunderous. "You lied to me," Sarah was shouting, her southern accent more pronounced in her distress. "You told me she was dead, but you just abandoned her to die. How could you?" Williams stepped toward his wife. his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Lower your voice and get that filthy animal out of my restaurant. We'll discuss this at home." The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Jack moved forward instinctively, positioning himself between the couple. "Mrs. Williams came to return my dog," he stated loudly enough for the gathering staff to hear. "I asked her to bring Bella here, since I was working." Williams' eyes narrowed at Jack's intervention. "This is none of your concern, Thompson. You no longer work here, remember?" "Actually, it is my concern," Jack replied evenly. "Bella is legally my dog now. Dr. Collins completed the adoption paperwork this morning with Mrs. Williams' blessing. The standoff might have continued, but at that moment Bella's attention fixed on something behind Williams. Her body tensed, a low growl building in her throat. Jack followed her gaze to see James Brennan entering the restaurant, his expression shifting from businesslike to confused as he took in the scene. "Michael, what's going on here?" Brennan asked, approaching the group. Jack felt Bella's growl intensify, her focus unwavering from Brennan. With sudden clarity, Jack remembered something about German shepherds. They never forgot a scent associated with danger. Bella had been Daniel's companion in Afghanistan before being retired. If Daniel had uncovered evidence about Tech Advance, and James Brennan had been involved, the realization struck Jack like a physical blow. Bella recognized James Brennan. She had been present when something happened between the Brennan brothers, something that perhaps explained Daniel's death. Before Jack could process this further, a waiter rushed through the main doors, panic evident in his voice. "Fire! There's a fire in the kitchen!" Smoke began billowing from the back of the restaurant, and the fire alarm shrieked to life. In the chaos that followed, staff evacuating, patrons from the bar area rushing toward exits, Jack lost track of Williams momentarily. When he spotted him again, the restaurateur was retreating toward his office rather than the exits, James Brennan close behind. Their faces wore identical expressions of calculation rather than concern. The kitchen fire was no accident. Jack was certain of it. A distraction, perhaps even an attempt to destroy evidence Elena might have gathered. As smoke filled the dining room and Sarah clutched Bella's leash with trembling hands, Jack faced a split-second decision: evacuate with the others or follow Williams and Brennan to discover what they were hiding. Just then, Bella wrenched free from Sarah's grip and bolted toward the office, disappearing into the thickening smoke. Jack didn't hesitate. With a quick command for Sarah to get to safety, he plunged after Bella, his military training kicking in as he navigated the increasingly dangerous environment. Whatever Williams and Brennan were hiding, Bella seemed determined to expose it, and Jack would not abandon her again. Jack stumbled through the thickening smoke, keeping low as he'd been trained to do in combat situations. The sounds of the restaurant's evacuation faded behind him as he followed Bella's path toward Williams' office. His lungs burned, his eyes watered, but the military discipline that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan guided his movements now. When he reached the office door, he found it locked, but Bella's urgent barking from inside drove him to action. With a powerful kick, he forced the door open, stumbling into the relatively smoke-free room to find Bella standing rigid, her teeth bared at Williams and Brennan, who were hastily stuffing documents into a briefcase. Both men looked up at Jack's entrance, their expressions shifting from surprise to cold calculation. Williams was the first to recover. "Your heroic rescue act is misplaced, Thompson. Get out while you can." Jack ignored him, his attention drawn to Bella's strange behavior. She wasn't just growling, she was fixated on Brennan with the focused intensity Jack had seen in military dogs identifying threats. "She knows you," Jack said to Brennan, realization dawning. "From Afghanistan. She was with Daniel when he died." Brennan's face hardened. "That dog should have died with him." He turned to Williams. "You told me this was handled." Before Williams could respond, the office filled with a new wave of smoke as flames licked at the doorframe. "We need to get out," Jack urged, coughing. "The whole place is going up." Williams grabbed the briefcase and moved toward a private exit at the back of the office. "This way," the 4 of them, Two men, one veteran, and a dog bound by a shared past none fully understood, fled the burning restaurant through the service corridor, emerging into the alley behind the building as sirens wailed in the distance. In the alley, Brennan suddenly produced a handgun, aiming it steadily at Jack and Bella. "This ends here. The dog, the evidence, all of it." Jack raised his hand slowly. "You killed your own brother," he said, the pieces finally clicking into place, "because he found out Tech Advance was selling information that got American soldiers killed." Brennan's expression remained impassive. Daniel was always self-righteous. He didn't understand that business is business. The gun shifted slightly, and Bella lunged forward with a ferocious bark just as Brennan fired. Jack felt a searing pain across his shoulder as he dove for cover. In the chaos, both Brennan and Williams fled, disappearing down the alley with the briefcase of evidence. Bella stood protectively over Jack, her fur singed from the fire, a shallow graze from the bullet marking her flank. "It's okay, girl," Jack murmured, pressing his hand against his wounded shoulder. "We're okay." But as he struggled to his feet, the world tilted alarmingly, and he slid back down against the brick wall. The bullet had done more damage than he'd initially assessed, and he was losing blood rapidly. Bella whined anxiously, licking his face as his vision began to blur. The last thing Jack heard before consciousness slipped away was Elena's voice shouting his name. Jack awoke in a hospital room, the sterile white ceiling swimming into focus as consciousness returned. His shoulder throbbed with a dull ache that suggested serious pain masked by medication. As his awareness expanded, he became aware of someone sitting beside his bed. Frank Miller, the cafe owner, his weathered face lined with concern. "Welcome back, son," Frank said quietly. "You gave us quite a scare." Jack tried to speak, but his throat was parched. Frank helped him sip water before Jack managed to croak. "Bella!" Frank's expression softened. "Your dog's fine. Got a scratch, but nothing serious. Sarah Williams has been taking care of her." Jack closed his eyes in relief, then opened them with renewed urgency. "Williams and Brennan got away," Frank confirmed grimly. "But not clean. That reporter friend of yours, Elena, she got out with copies of some of the documents they were trying to destroy. FBI's involved now." He leaned closer. "You did good, Jack, but you nearly died doing it." The full extent of Jack's situation became clear over the next few days. The bullet had torn through muscle and nicked an artery, requiring emergency surgery. He'd lost a dangerous amount of blood before paramedics reached him. The doctors explained that his recovery would be lengthy, 6 months of physical therapy at minimum, with no guarantee of full mobility in his left arm. Worse than the physical pain was the crushing psychological setback. The progress Jack had made managing his PTSD evaporated in the aftermath of the shooting. Night terrors returned with a vengeance, his mind conflating the restaurant fire with IED explosions in Afghanistan, Brennan's betrayal with the ambush that had killed Shadow and Daniel. During the day, he jumped at every loud noise, broke into cold sweats when hospital doors slammed, and spiraled into panic attacks when the fire alarm was tested. "It's a significant regression," the hospital psychiatrist explained gently, after Jack's third night of thrashing himself awake, screaming for Shadow. "Your brain is processing new trauma layered over existing PTSD. It's not weakness, Mr. Thompson. It's your mind trying to protect you." But Jack couldn't help feeling he'd failed. He'd built something resembling a normal life, only to watch it burn away as surely as the Heritage had. His mother visited daily, her face tight with worry she tried to hide. Abby put her college courses on hold to help at home, despite Jack's protests. And the mounting medical bills, even with his insurance from the Heritage, which would soon expire, threatened to sink the family back into the financial abyss Jack had worked so hard to escape. "I'm back where I started," Jack confessed to Frank during one of the older veterans' visits. "Worse, maybe. Before, I at least had my physical strength." Frank listened without interruption, then replied with the blunt honesty of someone who'd survived his own post-war darkness. You're looking at this all wrong, son. Before, you were just existing. Now you've stood for something. There's a difference. On Jack's 5th day in the hospital, Sarah Williams arrived with an unexpected visitor. Bella trotted into the room wearing a service dog vest, her amber eyes brightening at the sight of Jack. Without waiting for permission, she jumped onto the bed and curled carefully against his uninjured side, her head resting protectively on his chest. She wouldn't eat, Sarah explained, watching as Jack buried his face in Bella's fur, his shoulders shaking with silent emotion. Wouldn't settle. The clinic staff said she kept looking for you. She hesitated. Dr. Collins suggested we try bringing her to see you. She thought it might help you both. Jack nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Bella's warm weight against him felt like an anchor in a storm. Her steady heartbeat a rhythm his own began to match. For the first time since the shooting, Jack felt his constant hypervigilance ease slightly. The police found evidence that Michael was involved in arson schemes targeting competing restaurants, Sarah continued quietly. And Alina's documents proved James Brennan's company was selling classified information. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I've filed for divorce. Michael's assets are frozen, but I had some family money he couldn't touch. I've paid your hospital bills. Jack looked up in surprise. Sarah, you don't have to. Please, she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Let me do this. What Michael did to you, to Daniel Brennan, to others, I didn't know the extent of it, but I should have asked more questions. She glanced at Bella. I should have wondered why my husband would hurt something as innocent as a dog. After she left, Jack lay with Bella pressed against him, processing everything. The dog's presence seemed to quiet the chaos in his mind, her steady breathing a metronome that kept him centered when memories threatened to drag him under. That night, for the first time since the shooting, Jack slept without nightmares. Barry Collins visited the next morning to officially designate Bella as Jack's service dog. She was trained for this originally, the veterinarian explained as she completed the paperwork, working with veterans with PTSD. When her first handler died, she was retired to a shelter, but she never lost those skills. Dr. Collins smiled as Bella positioned herself protectively between the door and Jack's bed. She's chosen you, Jack. I've rarely seen such a strong bond form so quickly. The revelation about Bella's past brought Jack to the hospital's computer lab that afternoon, where he spent hours researching her history. With help from Alina's journalistic resources, he discovered that Bella had originally been trained by a non-profit organization specializing in service dogs for combat veterans. Further digging revealed something even more astonishing. Bella's first handler had been Lieutenant Mark Ramirez, a soldier who had saved multiple lives during a devastating natural disaster in the Philippines before later dying of wounds sustained in combat. She was a hero's dog, Jack told Bella that evening, stroking her ears as she rested her head on his lap. And now you're saving me. The next morning, Jack was preparing for his first physical therapy session when Dr. Collins rushed into his room, her expression urgent. Jack, we found something when processing Bella's complete medical records from Maryland. She handed him a folder. Look at the dates and location. Jack scanned the documents, his heart racing as he understood the implications. Bella had been transferred to the Maryland shelter the same week Daniel Brennan was killed in Afghanistan, and her original shipping documents listed her as having been evacuated from the same forward operating base where Jack's unit had been stationed. This can't be coincidence, Jack murmured, looking at Bella with new understanding. She wasn't just Daniel's friend in Afghanistan. She was there when he discovered what Brennan and Williams were doing. She might have been the only witness to what really happened. Bella met his gaze steadily, as if confirming his realization. In that moment, Jack understood that his connection to this dog wasn't random chance. It was part of a story that had begun years ago in the dust of Afghanistan and continued through to that rainy Boston morning when he'd chosen compassion over ambition. They were linked by threads of loss, betrayal, and now the possibility of justice and healing. 2 weeks after the shooting, Jack was released from the hospital with strict instructions for continued physical therapy and psychological counseling. Bella remained constantly at his side, her service dog Vest ensuring she could accompany him everywhere. The apartment building manager, moved by Jack's story, which had made local headlines, granted a special exception to their no pets policy. Jack was grateful for the small victory, but the larger challenges loomed inescapably. His depleted savings, uncertain employment prospects, and the ongoing investigation into Williams and Brennan, who remained at large despite a multi-state manhunt. On his first night home, Jack sat at the kitchen table reviewing his financial situation while his mother prepared dinner and Abby studied, the family falling into their old patterns despite the new presence of Bella curled at Jack's feet. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Jack's system. Bella immediately pressed against his leg, providing steady pressure that helped center him as she'd been trained to do. When Jack opened the door, he found himself face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s whose features carried the unmistakable echo of James Brennan. "Robert Brennan," the man introduced himself, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of long-time military service. "Daniel and James's older brother. May I come in?" Jack hesitated, but Bella showed none of the alertness she'd displayed around James. Instead, she approached Robert, sniffing his hand with apparent recognition. The dog's acceptance made Jack's decision. "You have 5 minutes," he said, stepping aside. Robert entered, nodding respectfully to Jack's mother and sister before turning his attention back to Jack. "I've been looking for you since the fire at the Heritage," he explained. "I need to tell you something about my brothers, about what really happened in Afghanistan." Jack led Robert to the small balcony for privacy, Bella following attentively. Outside, with the sounds of Boston traffic providing background noise, Robert seemed to struggle with where to begin. "I served 20 years, Army intelligence," he finally said. "Retired last year. Daniel was following in my footsteps, in his own way. Your brother James wasn't," Jack observed coldly. Robert's face tightened. "No, James was always different. Brilliant, but cold. When our parents died, they left the family business, what eventually became Tech Advance, to all 3 of us. James bought me out years ago. I thought Daniel was smart enough to stay clear, too." He exhaled heavily. "I was wrong. Daniel discovered Tech Advance was selling information to insurgents," Jack stated. "Information that got American soldiers killed." "Yes and no," Robert replied. "What Daniel found was more complicated. Tech Advance had developed advanced surveillance systems, supposedly for U.S. military use only. James was secretly selling modified versions to private military contractors who then resold them on the black market. Some ended up with insurgent groups, yes, but the bigger issue was the deliberate security vulnerabilities built into the systems our own troops were using." His voice hardened. "Including the systems your unit relied on." Jack felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "The ambush," he said quietly. "The one that killed Daniel and Shadow. It wasn't random." "No," Robert confirmed. "Daniel had gathered enough evidence to expose everything. He contacted me the night before, said he was going to secure final proof during your unit's patrol the next day. He never got the chance." Robert's eyes glistened. "I didn't learn that James was involved until months later when I found encrypted messages on Daniel's cloud backup. By then, the official investigation had already ruled it a standard insurgent attack." "But it wasn't standard at all," Jack said, the pieces falling into place. "We were deliberately led into that trap because your brother James knew Daniel had evidence against him." Robert nodded grimly. "James always had connections. People he could pay to ensure problems disappeared. I believe he used those connections to make sure your patrol route was compromised." Jack struggled to process the revelation. "How does Williams fit into this? And why would James risk shooting me in that alley?" Michael Williams was James's fixer in Boston, laundering money through restaurants, providing legitimate cover for meetings with contacts. As for why they'd risk shooting you, Robert sighed. Because of Bella. At the sound of her name, Bella's ears perked up. Robert reached into his jacket, producing a small plastic evidence bag containing a weathered metal dog tag. This was Shadow's, he explained, handing it to Jack. Found in Daniel's personal effects after his death. He'd removed it from Shadow's collar for some reason. Jack turned the tag over in his hand, a wave of grief washing through him at the tangible connection to his lost companion. Then he noticed something odd, a small seam along the edge. With careful fingers, he pried the tag open, revealing a miniature data storage device hidden within. Daniel was smarter than James realized, Robert said quietly. He didn't just gather evidence. He created a backup, something that would survive even if he didn't. I think he suspected he might be targeted. He hid it in Shadow's tag, Jack murmured, the weight of the small object suddenly immense. Yes, Robert confirmed. But when Shadow was killed, the tag must have fallen off in the confusion. Your military reports indicate you were the one who carried Shadow's body back to base. Jack nodded, the memory still raw. I couldn't leave him there. At some point, Bella must have found the tag, Robert continued. She was with Daniel frequently. Service dogs are trained to retrieve items their handlers indicate are important. I think she took it and kept it. Dogs can be remarkably protective of objects that carry their person's scent. So when James and William saw Bella at the restaurant, Jack began, they recognized her as Daniel's former companion and realized she might be the key to finding the missing evidence, Robert finished. Evidence that could send them both to prison for treason and murder. Jack stared at the tiny storage device, its potential for justice both breathtaking and terrifying. I need to get this to the FBI, he said, already reaching for his phone. Robert's hand shot out, gripping Jack's wrist with surprising strength. Not yet. This isn't just about bringing James and Williams to justice. There are others involved. Powerful people who've profited from these schemes. If you go to the FBI directly, there's no guarantee this evidence will ever see the light of day. His expression softened slightly at Jack's alarm. I'm not the enemy here, Thompson. Daniel trusted you enough to serve alongside you. That's good enough for me. Then what do you suggest? Jack asked, carefully extracting his wrist from Robert's grip. Elena Martinez, Robert replied. Your journalist friend. She has contacts at national papers, connections with federal prosecutors who can ensure this evidence is handled properly. Give her the device, let her make copies, and distribute them to multiple trusted sources before turning the original over to authorities. The suggestion made tactical sense, but Jack remained wary. Why should I trust you? You're still a Brennan. Robert's expression darkened. My brother dishonored our family name, violated his country's trust, and got our youngest brother killed. I want justice every bit as much as you do. He stood, moving toward the door. Think about it. Whatever you decide, be careful. James knows Bella is the key, which makes both of you targets. After Robert left, Jack sat on the balcony for a long time, turning the dog tag over in his hands while Bella watched him with attentive eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, a burden he hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about finding closure for Daniel's death or securing justice for the soldiers who died because of compromised intelligence. It was about preventing future betrayals, future deaths. Later that evening, as Jack prepared for bed, his phone rang with an unknown number. Cautiously he answered to find Elena's urgent voice on the other end. Jack, thank God. I've been trying to reach you, she said, background noise suggesting she was in a public place. I'm at South Station. I need to see you immediately. What's happened? Jack asked, instantly alert. I just got a call from an FBI contact. They've captured Williams trying to flee the country, but he's demanding to speak to you, only you, in exchange for information on James Brennan's whereabouts. She paused. There's something else. Williams is claiming he didn't try to kill you in that alley. He says James acted alone, and that he has proof James was responsible for what happened to your unit in Afghanistan. I know, Jack said quietly. I already have the proof. Elena's sharp intake of breath was audible. How? It's complicated. I'll explain everything, but not over the phone. Jack's gaze fell on Bella, who had raised her head at his change in tone. Can you come here? And Elena? Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even your FBI contact. After hanging up, Jack checked the apartment's locks and drew the blinds, hypervigilance resurfacing despite Bella's comforting presence. The truth was finally emerging, but with it came new dangers. Williams' capture was only the beginning. The real battle for justice, for closure, for some semblance of peace still lay ahead. And at the center of it all was the remarkable connection between a wounded veteran and the dog who had somehow bridged past and present, carrying the key to truth through years of separation. Jack knelt beside Bella, cradling her face in his hands. You were trying to tell me all along, weren't you? He whispered. You recognized Brennan at the restaurant. You knew what he'd done. Bella leaned into his touch, her steady gaze a silent affirmation. In that moment, Jack understood that their meeting hadn't been chance. It had been the completion of a circle that began years ago in the dust of Afghanistan. A circle that might finally bring justice for all they had lost. 1 year after the fire at the Heritage, Jack stood behind the polished wooden bar of Second Chance, surveying the evening crowd with quiet satisfaction. The renovated warehouse space in South Boston had been transformed into a warm, inviting establishment that defied easy categorization. Part restaurant, part community center, part sanctuary. Natural wood, exposed brick, and soft lighting created an atmosphere that was simultaneously upscale and unpretentious. Bella lounged on her custom bed near the host stand, occasionally greeting guests, but mostly maintaining a watchful eye over her domain. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After Williams's arrest and subsequent plea deal, the evidence from Shadow's dog tag had created a shockwave through military and intelligence communities. James Brennan had eventually been captured trying to cross into Canada, and the subsequent trial had exposed a network of corruption reaching into the highest levels of defense contracting. Jack had testified, reliving the ambush and its aftermath in excruciating detail, but the sense of justice served had provided its own form of healing. During those difficult months of investigation and testimony, an unexpected partnership had formed between Jack, Robert Brennan, and Sarah Williams. United by their shared determination to see justice done, they had found common purpose in planning for what would come after. It was Robert who had first suggested the restaurant concept, a place that would employ veterans struggling with civilian reintegration, with a portion of proceeds supporting service dog training program. Sarah had contributed her business acumen and part of her divorce settlement, while Jack provided the heart and vision of the enterprise. Still can't believe we pulled this off, Frank commented, joining Jack behind the bar. The older veteran had become an integral part of the operation, bringing decades of restaurant experience and serving as a mentor to the younger veterans on staff. 6 months ago, this place was an empty shell. Jack nodded, watching as Elena wove between tables, chatting with patrons. Her series of articles exposing the Tech Advance scandal had earned her a Pulitzer nomination and cemented her reputation as one of Boston's premier investigative journalists. She still maintained her newspaper position, but volunteered at Second Chance 2 nights a week, drawn by its mission and community. We've got a good team, Jack replied, nodding toward the kitchen where Chef Marcus, a former Navy culinary specialist with PTSD similar to Jack's, was expertly directing his staff. Near the entrance, Abby was handling the host duties for the evening, her college textbooks stashed beneath the stand for studying during quiet moments. The restaurant had become a family enterprise in the truest sense. The dinner rush proceeded smoothly. The well-trained staff, many of whom were veterans who had struggled to find employment elsewhere, moving with the coordinated precision that came naturally to those with military backgrounds. Bella maintained her position near the entrance, occasionally circulating among tables where her calming presence was welcomed by patrons. Several regulars specifically requested seating in Bella's section, finding comfort in the German Shepherd's dignified companionship. As the evening wound down, Jack noticed a new arrival, Dr. Sarah Collins from the veterinary clinic, accompanied by a young man in a wheelchair. Jack recognized him immediately as Kevin Martinez, a Marine who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Syria. Kevin had been one of the first veterans to participate in Second Chance's employment program, working in administrative roles while undergoing rehabilitation, but he had been absent for several weeks attending specialized therapy. "Special delivery," Sarah called, her face bright with excitement as she approached the bar. Behind her, Kevin wheeled forward with a large container in his lap. Inside, a German Shepherd puppy with a distinctive white star on its chest, the runt of Bella's litter, slept peacefully. "Star finished her basic training," Kevin explained, his expression softening as he looked down at the puppy. "The program director says she's showing exceptional aptitude as a mobility service dog." He swallowed hard. "They've approved her as my permanent companion." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. Star had been the smallest of Bella's puppies, the one he had physically helped deliver during those critical moments at the veterinary clinic. Like her mother, she had displayed an intuitive understanding of human emotions and needs, and Sarah had suggested enrolling her in the same service dog program that had originally trained Bella. "That's fantastic news," Jack managed, signaling for Abby to bring Bella over. The reunion between mother and daughter was both heartwarming and bittersweet. Bella gently nuzzled the puppy with recognition, while Star wiggled with excitement at her mother's familiar scent. "We have something else to celebrate," Sarah added, exchanging a knowing look with Kevin. "The last of Bella's puppies was placed today. All 6 have found their forever homes, 4 with veterans through the service dog program." The news completed a circle that had begun that rainy morning over a year ago. What had started with one act of compassion, stopping to help an abandoned dog, had expanded outward in ripples of positive change, touching lives Jack never could have imagined reaching. As the restaurant emptied and the staff began closing procedures, Robert Brennan arrived for their weekly meeting. These Sunday night sessions had become a tradition, a time for the 3 partners to review operations and plan future initiatives. Tonight, however, Robert carried a manila envelope with official-looking seals. "The final settlements came through," he announced without preamble, laying out documents on the bar. "The Tech Advance assets that weren't seized by the government have been liquidated and distributed to victims' families." His voice grew softer. "Including significant compensation to the families of soldiers lost in the ambush that killed Daniel." Jack ran his fingers over the paperwork, emotion tightening his chest. No amount of money could bring back those who had been lost, but the acknowledgment of wrongdoing and attempt at restitution mattered. It was, in its own imperfect way, a form of justice. "There's something else," Robert continued, producing a smaller envelope. "This is for you, Jack. The committee felt it was appropriate, given your role in exposing the truth." Inside was a formal letter announcing the establishment of the Daniel Brennan Memorial Scholarship for Veterans in Computer Science at Boston University, with a request that Jack serve on the selection committee. Accompanying it was a personal note from the Secretary of the Army, informing Jack that his service dog Shadow was being posthumously awarded the Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery. "I don't know what to say," Jack admitted, overwhelmed by the recognition. "You don't need to say anything," Robert replied simply. "Just keep doing what you're doing here," he gestured around the restaurant. "This place is already changing lives." Near midnight, after everyone else had gone, Jack remained at the restaurant, completing paperwork at a corner table with Bella dozing at his feet. The quietness of the empty space was peaceful rather than lonely, a moment of stillness after a day of purposeful activity. His shoulder still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of the bullet that had nearly taken his life, but the physical therapy had restored most of his mobility. The psychological healing had been more complex but equally profound, aided immeasurably by Bella's constant presence and the supportive community that had formed around Second Chance. A soft knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Jack looked up to see Elena peering through the glass, raising a questioning eyebrow. He smiled and went to let her in. "Forgot my laptop," she explained, retrieving it from beneath the table where she'd been working earlier. Instead of leaving immediately, she hesitated. "Got a minute? There's something I want to run by you." They settled at the bar, Bella rousing herself to pad over and rest her head on Elena's lap. Jack poured 2 small glasses of bourbon, a luxury he now allowed himself occasionally when the nightmares were at bay. "I've been offered a book deal," Elena revealed, absently stroking Bella's ears. "Publisher wants me to write the full story of the Tech Advance scandal, from Daniel's initial discovery through the trials." She met Jack's eyes. "It would include your story and Bella's. I won't do it without your blessing." Jack considered the proposition, watching the amber liquid in his glass catch the low light. A year ago, the idea of having his trauma examined in print would have been unthinkable. Now he found himself nodding slowly. "On one condition," he said. "The focus stays on the people who deserve to be remembered. Daniel, Shadow, the other soldiers who didn't make it home." He took a measured breath. "And make sure people understand about Bella. How extraordinary it is that she found me that day. How she carried the truth all those years." Elena's expression softened. "Some might call that coincidence. Others might call it fate. I don't know what I'd call it," Jack admitted, reaching down to run his hand along Bella's back. "I just know I was supposed to find her. We were supposed to finish what Daniel started." The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect New England autumn day. Jack rose early as always, his military habits unchanged despite his new civilian life. After helping his mother with her morning medications, much reduced now that her health care was stable, he and Bella set out for their daily run along the harbor. As they jogged past the gleaming waters, Jack found himself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led him here. He had lost so much: his military career, his service dog, years of his life to PTSD and struggle. Yet as Bella trotted beside him, her presence solid and unwavering, Jack felt a sense of purpose that had once seemed permanently beyond his reach. Second Chance wasn't just the name of his restaurant. It was the gift he had been given when he chose compassion over ambition on that rainy morning. They paused at a scenic overlook, Bella sitting attentively at Jack's side as he gazed across the harbor. From this vantage point he could see both where he had been and where he was going, the past with its shadows and the future with its possibilities. Between them stood the present moment, a man and a dog, bound by circumstances neither could have imagined, each healing the other in ways that defied simple explanation. "Come on, girl," Jack said softly, turning back toward the path. "We've got work to do." Bella rose immediately, falling into step beside him as they continued their journey together. Two survivors who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. Not just a second chance, but a new beginning. In our later years, we often reflect on the paths we've traveled and wonder if our choices truly mattered. Jack and Bella's story reminds us that compassion is never wasted, even when it seems to come at great personal cost. Like Jack, many of us have weathered storms of loss, carried burdens of trauma, and faced moments where the right choice wasn't the easy one. Yet it's precisely in these moments of sacrifice that life's most meaningful connections are formed. The bond between a wounded veteran and an abandoned dog speaks to something profound in the human experience, our capacity to heal each other through unconditional presence. Sometimes the things we've lost, careers, relationships, dreams we once cherished, make space for unexpected blessings we couldn't have imagined. Second chances aren't just for the young. They arrive throughout our lives, often disguised as challenges or painful choices. But when we choose courage and compassion, even at our most vulnerable, we create ripples that extend far beyond ourselves. Your life's greatest impact may still be waiting, hidden in a seemingly small act of kindness you've yet to perform. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.